Okay, so when I began my career as a photographer professionally shooting weddings, one of the things that I really wanted to achieve was I wanted to have my own signature look. So for a very, very long time, I was working on developing my own preset. One thing that I found myself and other people doing was looking at other people's work. So exploring presets and seeing how they were editing things or trying to apply someone else's look to my work. And I got to a point where I realized, you know what? I need to figure out my own style. I need to figure out what really speaks to me. What's the important things in the photos that I want to have control over and I wanted to define my style. Specifically for me was always prioritizing skin tones, having a true to color white balance, something that's clean, something that's timeless. I know timeless is a word that's overused, but when I say that, it's something that people can look back years down the road and still absolutely love and not try to explain that it was a cool trend at the moment. That was one thing that I really, really prioritize is that having a consistent style throughout all of my work, that when people would see it, it would be recognized and they would say, I love the way that you do this. Years down the road, now I'm in a place where people see my work and they say, I love the shades of green in your photos. No matter what lighting I'm in, I'm very picky about my colors, the saturation, the hues of my greens, amongst other things. And that's something that I've developed and cultivated over time. So today I want to talk about the different settings that you should be mindful of when you're adjusting in your developing process that will have a big effect on your style, on your look, and your consistency. So which are the settings that you should maybe consider keeping the same throughout all lighting scenarios or times a day that will be kind of like signature to your look? You know, which ones you should just leave alone and not overthink it. Because one thing that I see that is a very common problem is people overthinking editing and over adjusting to try and compensate for opposing adjustments. I think people overcomplicate editing. I'm going to try and see if we can simplify it for you here a little bit. Let's dive in and talk about how to develop a consistent style and look to your photos so that you can develop that trust with your couples and they know that they're going to get your look every single time, no matter what situation you're in. Okay, so over time, I have developed my preset to the place that I love it. Now I have to do very minimal adjustments when I'm editing. One thing that took me the longest was to just figure out what it was that I wanted to prioritize, what it was that I really liked. And once I found it, I just stuck to it. So there's certain things that when I'm editing, I never touch, I never change. And yes, it's okay. Over time, you will evolve. You might like a little more contrast at times or a little less contrast at time, and that's okay for your preset to change. I find that my preset changes a little bit every year. Keep that in mind, that I'm not saying to never, pick something and never change it, but it is okay to have a consistent look by keeping certain things the same throughout that are going to be markers to your definitive style. One of those things for me personally is the tone curve. So the tone curve is something that I've messed with forever and ever and ever. I know some people do specifically tone curve adjustments for different colors, right? So with your HSL, your reds, greens, and blues. I know some people will make adjustments in the individual colors. But I personally just do a global just tone curve adjustment. And this tone curve adjustment stays the same throughout my entire editing process. So if you look, I'm going to just move through all these photos and you see that the tone curve is the exact same in every single one. The reason being is because in my tone curve, I am personally not using it to adjust color. So with the tone curve, I mean that you can specifically attack, let's say, highlights, shadows, midtones, darks, brights, blacks or whites. It just by adjusting this tone curve here. So if you want to say add a little more red to your highlights. So anything that's a highlight is going to be the brightest part of the pictures here. So let's say the white shell, anything the light's hitting directly right the tablecloth. If I wanted to add red to that on the highlights only, I would go ahead and anchor the midtones and your shadows and then I would adjust here on the highlight side, and you see how if I slide down, I'm doing green, I'm taking away red, adding green. If I slide up, I'm adding red to it, right? If I slide down, I'm taking away red, adding green. If I slide up, I'm adding red to it. If I want to do same thing for the midtones, slide up red, right? So I know some people use these adjustments to stylize their pictures. Personally, I don't. I think that it can get messy quickly, especially in different environments of lighting. You can use this as a nice tool to kind of balance out colors if you're shooting in a room that's overly tungsten lighting and you shot in natural light and you want to try and bring back some of that and balance it. You can always slide it towards the blue and it'll cool everything off a little bit, or you can warm everything up if everything's too blue. But personally, I like to do it with my white balance sliders and other tools. I don't mess with the color tone curve adjustments because I think you can get a little messy when dealing with different lighting scenarios. So I strictly use my tone curve for tonality. So that means deepening contrast or softening my blacks. So that means the black point of my photo, the darkest, so wherever there's black in my picture, what do I want that to look like? Do I want it to look really rich and deep, or do I want it to look a little bit softer and faded, right? That's why you find that here my black point on the tone curve is raised up a little bit, right? Because I want my black point to be a little bit softer, not as punchy, which in turn brings down a little bit of the contrast, giving it more of a filmish, softer look. And same thing here, if you want your highlights, your whites to be super bright white, you would leave it right at the top, but I don't like that fully bright contrasty whites. I want my whites to be a little bit muted. And instead of targeting so much with a slider, I know this is a look that I want throughout all of my photos. So I just attach it right there on my tone curve. And same for the midtones. I want them a little bit softer. So my shadows, that being anything that's in the mid range, not super bright, not super dark, I want it a little bit softer. So I do this because I don't like high contrasty photos. I want it to have a little bit of a softer approach, a little bit softer transition from highlights to shadows, from whites to blacks. I wanted a little bit of a softer transition, and I know I want this unanimously throughout all of my photos. So that's why the tone curve always remains the same as I move through my pictures. Let's say here, direct, strong sunlight, same as a reception photo, as a soft light photo, as it never ends, right? In room dark photo, here's an outdoor photo. You see that my tone curve remains the same throughout the entire day. What about flash photo at night? Long exposure right here, boom, same thing, right? Let's look at this photo, dance floor photo with a flash. Tone curve remains the same. Okay, so that's one of the things that I personally have found very helpful to keeping my style consistent. Another one that I never, ever change and stays the same because I believe it's a stylistic adjustment that gives consistency to my photos is the vibrance and saturation. You will see if I scroll through all thousands of the photos in my galleries, you'll notice that the vibrance and saturation are going to remain the same. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I notice a lot of people when they get into learning how to edit, learning Lightroom. This is something that I did myself is boom, they start just jamming sliders one end or the other, and every picture that they shoot even within the same gallery, within the same sequence, they are just sliding things, opposing. So this photo, you might have your vibrance up, the next photo, you might have your vibrance down, when maybe it's not an issue of how vibrant your colors is, maybe it's an issue of white balance. Right? Or maybe it's an issue that just the yellows in that photo are over vibrant, that you can attack directly just the yellows as opposed to the overall global adjustment. You can do a local adjustment targeting just that color instead of affecting the entire photo. So that's another thing that I found at the beginning is people just start without just going wild and sliding things. You don't need to do that so much. Simplify it. My approach to editing is I want to make the least amount of adjustments to achieve the same look every time. So vibrance and saturation is another thing I always keep the same. Here, texture, clarity, and dehaze, so my presence sliders. This is something that I do occasionally, depending. It's a situational based choice that I will make. So if it's a photo that has a lot of backlight coming in and my colors are really washed out, my contrasts are really washed out, maybe a lot of little dehaze. If I'm doing a photo of details and it came out a little soft because the light wasn't enough, so I'm pushing my settings, which in turn will softens up the edges a little bit, especially a higher ISO, maybe a lot of touch of clarity. But I very rarely will use these. It's just something that I do when it's specifically needed for that purpose. I've seen some presets that they like to add a little clarity for their look, and that's fine. That's absolutely great. I've seen it done very tasteful and it looks beautiful, but you don't want to overdo it because it starts to look a little funky, right? So just keep in mind, this is what I do. You don't have to do it how I do it. It's all I'm saying is figure out the ones that really define the look and style of what you like, that you want it to be consistent throughout all of your photos, and try to not just change those all the time. Try to keep them within the same parameters. So number one for me was always the tone curve. Number two was the vibrance and saturation. Okay. Another one that I never really change is my contrast slider. As I said, I found the level of contrast that I like in my photos, combination of using the tone curve and the contrast slider, as well as the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, which in turn, I mean, these four sliders right here are essentially contrast, right? So if I wanted to add more contrast to the photo without using my contrast slider, I would just bring my highlights up and my whites up, and I would darken my blacks and my shadows. So contrast is just that difference, making that transition from whites to blacks a little more noticeable, a little bit more harsh, or just what would be the right word? Stronger. So making your brights brighter, your whites whiter, your shadows darker, and your blacks blacker, right? So if I slide up my contrast, you'll see, right? It's the difference between highlights to darks to shadows increases. So you're richening your blacks, you're brightening your whites, you're darkening your shadows by adjusting contrast. So you could do the same exact thing by just bring your highlights up, bring your shadows down, bring your whites up, and bring your blacks down, right? This is extreme. Obviously, you wouldn't do it like that, but you could achieve it by, if I just, let's go right here, right? We're going to bring our exposure back down, obviously, because when I brought the highlights up, the highlights were a little crushed and overexposed. So if we bring our exposure back to neutral, right, I would bring my highlights and my whites up. I would darken up my shadows a little bit, and then the black point. And then you end up with a more contrasty photo. Not the look I would like. Maybe you could bring up the shadows and darken up that up. But I'm saying that these four adjustments right here, you're controlling essentially one slider. So without getting too deep and too confusing, I don't want to get you guys all over the place. That contrast slider always stays the same. If I find that sometimes there's too much contrast, instead of adjusting my tone curve, I'll just bring down the slider a touch. But I personally never go below 40. I usually stay at 45 or 40. I'm right there. The other thing I never really change, I found that my highlights were always the same. If I find that they're really, really bright, maybe I'm underexposing or I'm overexposing, so I will stay a little bit on the lower end there. Okay, so if I find that I'm overexposing, maybe I'll bring down my highlights a little bit more to like the -65, right? If I find my shadows are a little bit, my presets usually at 35. If I find that they're a little bit dark and I want to just soften it up even more, I bring it up to 40, right? Plus 40 there. And my whites are always at -10. If I find that I need a little more pop or something like that, especially like if you're in a really soft lighting, backlighting, or just in the shade, I'll bring it up to 0, right? If I want my whites to just have a little more pop, add a little more contrast, but not overall. I don't want to darken my shadows and my blacks because I feel like they're fine. But to add a little more pop to my whites, I just bring that white slider up. But when I apply my preset, to begin with, it'll be my contrast always at 45. My highlights will be always at -60. My shadows always at 35. My whites are -10. Then when I import my photos and I import it with a preset, I don't have to go making those adjustments again over and over and over. I found that these are the ones that I was always making. Usually around this are the average parameters. So that's where I set my preset to, is these average parameters, so that when they're imported now, I don't have to make huge changes. They're pretty much 90% of the way there. All I have to adjust really is the white balance and the exposure. Everything else is good to go. And these are things that I found throughout time. I consistently found myself making the same adjustments, so I just added them and updated my preset to repeat those consistent adjustments. To develop a consistent look, first figure out what your tone curve is going to look like to achieve that look that you want, and try to keep that the same without changing it photo to photo. Same for these, major adjustments here. Obviously, your exposure is going to change a lot depending on the photo. If you over or underexposed it, your white balance is always going to change. I don't believe that you could have the same one unless you're doing black and white everything. You can't have that same white balance because you're shooting at different light temperatures, right? So that's always going to change. Exposure is always going to change. But for me, these are always in that same range of 40 to 45. This one's in -70 to -50. The shadows are always between 30 and 40. The whites are always between -10 and 0. Blacks are always remaining in 0. For me, I never really use that. Same with these. The vibrance and saturation are always going to remain the same for me. I never ever change those. Those I haven't changed in years. Another thing that's really going to define a style is going to be your color mixer and color grading. This is where you get the look of your colors, right? So color mixing is more of adjusting each individual color in the frame. You can desaturate, you can saturate, you can change the hue, you can change the luminance, which is the brightness or darkness of your colors, right? These are style-based adjustments. So these are ones that will change the look and kind of define your signature style to your preset. So this is another thing that you kind of want to keep the same and consistent throughout all your photos. Now, that being said, you might be in a scenario where maybe your shadows are a little bit warmer than you want to, or your yellows are looking a little bit green, or your greens are looking a little yellow, and you want to adjust that to compensate and achieve that same color look that you have throughout all the other photos, because the light might be different in this shoot, and that's okay. You can shift. You don't have to. Sometimes I do change that, right? If my yellows are a little bit too green and I want them to be a little more yellow, I'll shift that way. If they're too orangey and yellow, then I'll shift the other way to make them greener, right? So you see that difference. So, or skin tones. Sometimes there's a lot of light bouncing off of greenery and coming back to your couple, and now their skin's looking a little yellowish green. You can bring back a little color and shift it this way to make it a little orangey. Just give it a little more life to it, right? Take away some of that green bounce that's coming off that green tint that's coming off of the leaves and the grass, right? Not make them look so sickly. So that's okay to change, but most of the time you're gonna find through all of my photos, once again, doesn't matter if it's a sunset time, if it's in the shade here, if we're looking at a nighttime photo, if we're looking at this other photo here, ceremony style, they're always going to be the same. My sliders will always remain the same because they're stylistic adjustments to my colors. Color grading, I used to make a lot of changes. This is where you can add different hues and shades of colors, varying saturations and luminance to certain parts of your picture. So just like we did here in the tone curve by making certain adjustments and adding colors to certain parts of your photos, so your highlights, your midtones, or your shadows, or your blacks, or your whites. If you can add red or add green, if you can add green or add, or magenta or blue and yellow, right? You can kind of change the stylistic look of that. You can do the same exact thing here, a little more targeted with color grading. So as you see here, it says midtones, shadows, highlights, right? What do you want to add here? If I want to add blue to my highlights, all I would have to do is just here, I would shift, right? The more I slide it to the outside of the circle, the more blue I'm adding, the more saturated that blue is I'm adding. The more I slide it to the center is the less I'm adding, right? So that's something that I've found. A lot of people used to add red to the shadows. That was like a look. Oh, by the way, if you double click any adjustment, it'll zero it out. So this was a popular look, adding yellow or a little bit of reds to your shadows. That was like a thing that was happening a few years back. And if that's what you like, do it, go for it. But just be aware that when you make these adjustments, is something that is, going to be defining your look. So you might want to be consistent, unless your thing is that every time you shoot, you deliver something totally different and you just want to experiment and get artsy and get wild, then that's fine. Maybe that's what your clients want. They just want something unique every single time that's going to be different. But for me, what I've found in weddings is that they see what you do, they see your website, and they want that, right? So if they want that and you give them that, something different, they want that and you give them this, they're going to be like, wait, I hired you for your look, but you gave me something totally different. So in weddings, I found that instilling trust with your clients and that they're going to get what they picked you for is very important. So that's why consistency when editing and having those style defining adjustments be the same throughout, I find it very important. So color grading, I used to add a little warmth to the shadows and a little blue to the highlights to just kind of make that pop a little more, but I don't do that so much anymore. The only time I'll find myself adding a little blue to the highlights is if my tones are muddy. So if the lighting was not the best and I find it that there was a little bit mixed of white balance there, different lighting conditions, and the photos looking a little muddy where there's no pop to my whites because they're too warm and blending into the warmness of the background, then maybe a lot of little blue to the whites just to make them jump, just to clean them up a little bit. So if they're too warm and too yellow, then a lot of little blue so that the whites look just true to color white balance. Another thing that I do here is the lens correction. So I always do get rid of the vignetting on the lens, the factory vignetting that you might get from your lens. I take that off, and that's a stylistic choice that I made and that I keep true every time. And same for your calibration. Calibration, I strongly recommend that stays the same throughout all of your photos. So don't go getting crazy with calibration, because that's a very complicated set of sliders that you will be adjusting, and it's hard to understand. I highly recommend you can look it up and get yourself familiar with it if you're going to mess with it. If I can tell you one slider alone to mess with before you dive deep into these, is just your shadows, right? The tint of the shadows, whether you're going green or magenta, and how you want that to be affected. That's the one slider that I would recommend. Here it starts to get really interesting. So that's another one. So to go back, is calibration something that stays the same every single photo that I take. Lens correction, something that stays the same for me every photo I take. Color grading, color mixer, tone curve, vibrance, saturation. And then the ones that are kind of the same but shift a little bit is the contrast, highlight, shadows, whites, right? Those are the ones that, the 4 adjustments that I kind of shift, but not a lot. They're still within that same average every single time. And the ones that I change the most is going to be exposure and white balance. Okay. Because those are, they're never going to be the same, depending on the lighting and the place that you're shooting in. I hope that this was helpful. I know that is a lot of information. I truly believe that if you find those looks, so you get the look that you want to your photos, and you find yourself making these adjustments over and over, maybe you should consider keeping those adjustments consistently, because they're defining your style. If it involves colors, unless it's an overall adjustment to the white balance, I highly recommend that. If If you want it to be your signature, like for me, greens are very important. My signatures, my greens are going to look the same every single time, and that my skin tones are going to be true to what they were. Same with a white balance. That's my signature. So I prioritize those things. I found the ones that I like, and I keep it the same every time. If you like this video and enjoyed it, please feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be uploading more and more of this content. If you want to dive deeper, I'm doing a lot of in-depth re-education on my Facebook page. So if you want to go there and join, I'm excited to be doing this. I enjoy this. And if you don't agree with what I'm teaching, it's totally fine, because art is subjective and there is no right or wrong way to do it. There's only the way that you like to do it. So have fun, get out there, shoot, edit, and get creative.